Hey there, Drowsy Historian here. Tonight you're far from the sunlit temples of classical Greece, deep in the Lorien Hills, where the air tastes of metal and the earth breathes in slow, tired draughts. You're not a citizen or a soldier, you're just another slave swallowed by the narrow shafts of a silver mine, drifting through a world carved from stone and silence. Before we start, do me one small favour. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. If you prefer these stories without ads, you can join the Patreon. It's linked in the description. And if you want the ultimate immersive experience, consider using a pair of wireless earbuds. They're comfortable, discreet, and designed so you can wear them even while sleeping. I've linked my favourite pair, plus other sleep tools, in the description. Now, lie back, get comfortable. Let's begin. You arrive at the edge of the Lorien Hills in the pale morning haze, and for a moment you stand still, as though the earth itself is waiting for you to understand something. The air is cool, almost gentle, carrying the scent of crushed stone and the faint metallic bitterness that drifts upward from the mines below. The world feels strangely muted. Even the birds seem reluctant to break the quiet, offering only short, uncertain calls that vanish quickly into the brightening sky. You breathe in slowly, as if preparing yourself for a day that has already been chosen for you. The horizon stretches in soft folds of dusty blue, and you sense, with calm inevitability, that whatever life you once had is already far behind you. That old life feels like a pale, half-remembered dream someone else told you about. It's easier not to think about it, easier to stand here, accepting the stillness, letting it wrap around you like a loose garment that doesn't quite fit. The ground under your feet is dry and uneven, covered in powdery earth that clings to your skin, as though the hills are already trying to claim you. You watch the light creeping down the rock faces, revealing ridges, shallow pits, abandoned shafts, and pathways shaped by countless footsteps before yours. Everything seems to follow a quiet order, the kind of order that doesn't need to explain itself. You'll learn it soon enough. You always do. To your left, a group of workers moves in a slow procession, carrying simple tools over their shoulders. They don't speak. They don't need to. Their silence is practiced, not forced, the silence of people who know the shape of their day long before it begins. Their bodies tilt slightly forward, as if gravity itself is gently tugging them toward the same destination. You feel the pull as well, soft, patient, unavoidable. Behind you, a handler clears his throat. The sound is polite, almost apologetic, as though he's aware you already know you need to keep moving. There's no rush, not really, but there is a schedule, and schedules care very little for personal feelings. You start walking, your steps small at first, then steadier as your feet find the narrow path that winds between the low scrub and scattered stones. The air shifts as you descend a shallow slope. You can hear the faint clatter of metal from somewhere in the distance, tools striking rock in a slow, irregular rhythm. It's not loud enough to be disturbing, but it lingers, a tired heartbeat of the hills. You follow the sound, not because you want to, but because your body has been nudged in that direction by a system older and larger than your memories. There's a strange comfort in the routine. You don't need to make decisions. The pathway tells you where to place your feet. The guards decide when you pause, when you continue, when you breathe a little deeper. In a way, the structure frees you from yourself. You can almost imagine you are watching someone else move your limbs, someone who understands these hills far better than you do. The sun rises slowly behind you, stretching your shadow long across the ground. You watch it move as you walk, a thin figure trailing behind like a loyal companion, always present, always quiet. You glance at it now and then, as if expecting it to offer comfort or advice. It offers neither, but at least it stays with you, more than some things. The settlement comes into view gradually, its simple wooden structures blending into the dusty landscape until the shapes distinguish themselves one by one. A few smoke plumes rise from small fires. The scent of stale bread drifts faintly in the air, though not enough to make the stomach growl. Hunger, like everything else here, has learned patience. Workers move about in calm patterns, carrying buckets, sorting tools, checking ropes. No one appears hurried. No one appears hopeful. They simply do what must be done. You observe them with a strange detachment, as though you are studying a quiet colony of ants, organised, steady, purposeful, in an understated way. You can almost sense the years of repetition etched into their movements, each gesture worn smooth through constant use. For a moment you imagine what it might feel like to belong to such routine, not happily perhaps, but comfortably. Predictability has its own serenity. Even the dust that clings to everything carries a message. Nothing changes quickly here. Nothing surprises. An overseer passes nearby, his sandals brushing softly against the ground. He barely glances at you. His expression is neutral. The expression of someone inspecting equipment rather than acknowledging a human presence. But there's no malice in it, only habit. You're simply another part of the morning inventory, as ordinary as the baskets of tools or the coils of rope. A number waiting to be sorted, a line on a tablet waiting to be checked off. Oddly, the thought brings a strange, almost dry humour to your chest. To be an administrative detail is perhaps simpler than being anything else. You continue through the settlement, guided by gestures rather than words. Someone points, you follow. Someone nods, you pause. The system moves around you like a soft, slow tide, guiding you without urgency. It's all very calm, all very procedural. If you weren't paying attention, you might think this is just another ordinary morning in a peaceful community, everyone preparing for a long, predictable day. A breeze passes through, lifting a faint cloud of dust from the ground and carrying it over your skin. It settles in your hair, your clothes, the lines of your hands. You brush some of it away out of instinct, but it leaves smudges instead of relief. The dust isn't something you remove, it's something you acquire. It's almost a uniform, one that fits better the longer you wear it. As you continue forward, the hills open slightly, revealing deeper cuts in the earth. Trenches, pits, tunnels that look like narrow mouths breathing out cool, stale air. You don't approach them yet, but you feel their presence. The quiet breath of the underground sweeps past your ankles in faint currents, carrying the scent of stone rubbed raw by many hands. You pause at a small rise in the ground, more out of instinct than command. From this vantage, the entire scene spreads before you like a slow, tired painting. Miners moving in their quiet lines, the hills stretching outward in patient ripples, the morning sun washing everything in a pale, indifferent glow. The world does not resent your arrival. It simply absorbs it. Your shoulders relax in a way you don't fully notice. You're not at ease, but you're sinking to the rhythm, into the idea that your day has already been carved into the shape it will follow. There is no rush. The hill waits, the shafts wait, even the dust seems to wait, drifting lazily through the air until it finds a place to land. Someone taps your arm lightly, a gesture to continue. You do. The path under your feet narrows, leading you quietly toward the place where the earth's breath grows cooler. You walk with the soft acceptance of someone who has realized that the road is not a choice, but a continuation of a process already underway. And as you move, the world around you settles into its steady pulse, dust rising, tools clinking, shadows stretching, and you feel yourself drifting gently toward the threshold of the life beneath the hills, carried by a routine that now encloses you with the calm inevitability of night following day. The path settles into a faint curve as you follow the others toward a shaded area where the ground has been levelled into a wide, pale clearing. A few thin trees stand at the edges, their leaves dull with dust, their shadows stretched and brittle across the earth. You walk into the shade because everyone else does, and because the air beneath it feels slightly cooler, like a controlled exhale from the hills. A wooden table sits in the centre, its surface worn smooth by hands that have passed over it countless times. The men behind the table do not look up when you approach. They do not need to. Your presence has already been calculated the moment your footsteps entered their hearing. Their robes are simple but unblemished, a quiet reminder that some work here is done in daylight and fresh air. One of them gestures absently, the movement small enough to be mistaken for him shooing away a fly. But it is meant for you. You step forward. Another man records something on a clay tablet, the stylus clicking softly as he presses it into the surface. Each mark he makes feels like a small verdict. You notice how relaxed his hand is, how steady. He has done this thousands of times, and each stroke of the stylus carries the same calm certainty. Another body accounted for, another task aligned with the machinery of the hills. You're not asked for your name. The question never arises. It would be an unnecessary ornament in a place designed for function. Names require memory, and memory requires space. Luxury is not allotted to the system that now encloses you. Instead, the official to your right lifts a small tablet, studies it for a moment, and taps it with a finger to draw your attention. The number etched into it is simple, almost artless. A few straight lines, pressed deep enough to outlast rain, sunlight, seasons, and you. He raises his chin slightly, the closest thing to acknowledgement you receive, and then sets the tablet down as though placing a stone among many others. The gesture is neat, practiced, emotionless. A small tag made of lead is pressed into your hand. The metal is cold, heavier than you expect, shaped without care but with clear purpose. The number carved into it matches the one on the tablet. You run your thumb over the grooves, feeling how blunt and final they are. This tag will hang around your neck soon enough. For now, it just rests against your palm, warming slowly as though reluctant to join you. No one explains its meaning. No one needs to. The moment you touch it, the truth settles in, with the dry ease of dust finding a new surface. Whatever name once belonged to you will not be used here. It will erode quietly, the way water slips from a cracked cup. This new number is simpler to remember, easier to replace, more convenient to store. The official closest to you points toward a narrow bench. You walk to it and sit without instruction, because this place has a way of teaching you the expected movements before the orders arrive. The bench creaks under your weight, its wood dry and slightly warped. You imagine it has held thousands just like you, and will continue to hold thousands more, long after your number is smoothed by time. Another man approaches with a small wooden box. He opens it with the same indifference someone might show when opening a drawer filled with identical tools. Inside are dozens of tags just like the one in your hand. He checks yours, nods faintly, and moves on. You watch the box go from shadow to sunlight, the metal pieces inside catching the light for a moment before closing again like a quiet secret. All around you, the administrative murmurs continue. Soft voices exchanging details, styluses clicking against clay, sandals shifting against the earth. It is a peaceful sound, if you don't think too hard about its purpose. The kind of sound a machine would make if it breathed. You sense its rhythm, its tired efficiency, and you let it wash over you without resistance. It is easier than imagining alternatives. A young assistant stands before you now, holding a thin strip of leather. He does not speak. He simply waits until you hand him the tag, and then ties it neatly to the strip. His fingers move quickly, looping and knotting with a precision learned through endless repetition. When he places the finished piece around your neck, the metal thumps lightly against your chest. The weight is more symbolic than physical, but you still feel your shoulders shift under it. The assistant steps back and studies you for a moment. Not in curiosity, not in anything resembling human interest, but in a quiet, inventory-like assessment, as if ensuring the tag sits correctly and will cause no disruptions later. When he is satisfied, He gives a small nod. You are now properly categorized, efficiently prepared, ready for placement. The system appreciates order. It thrives on it. You stand when another gesture calls you. It's a sweep of the hand, almost lazy in its ease, directing you toward another section of the clearing. You follow without hesitation. At this point, moving where you're pointed has become second nature. A few other new arrivals gather there, each with their own tags resting against their chests. Some look down at them, others stare blankly ahead. The expressions vary, but the quiet acceptance is the same. You notice a man older than you flexing his fingers, absent-mindedly, as though testing whether the number has already changed how he moves. A younger one beside him keeps touching the tag lightly, as if half convinced it might fall off if he stops paying attention. You don't touch yours. You know it isn't going anywhere. An overseer joins the group. His eyes skim over each of you with a calm, almost bored professionalism. He carries a rod, not raised, not threatening, simply present like a punctuation mark at the end of each instruction. When he speaks, his voice is measured, quiet, almost soothing. He doesn't ask you to listen. He assumes you will, and you do. He begins listing assignments in a dry, steady tone. Not the work itself, that comes later, but the simple, administrative sorting that decides where bodies will be placed today. The tone is so neutral that you almost expect him to yawn between sentences, though he never does. His composure is unwavering, as though he is reciting the steps of a familiar ritual. You are directed toward a smaller group standing to the side. The decision is made quickly, easily. You have been fit into a line of purpose, another small component in the day's quiet machinery. The overseer's gaze moves on from you immediately, already searching for the next detail to adjust. You walk to your assigned position. The ground here is a little more packed, the footprints deeper and more numerous. You feel the number at your chest shift slightly with each breath, brushing against your skin like a reminder whispered in metal. It isn't painful, just present, persistent. From somewhere behind you, a new sound begins to rise. The steady march of workers preparing to move toward the shafts. The dull clink of tools being distributed. The soft calls of handlers guiding groups into neat formations. A slow wave of movement spreads outward, touching each part of the settlement with ritual familiarity. You stand in that movement now, held within its rhythm, and you feel the transition settling into your bones. You're no longer an arrival, no longer something undefined. The hills have found a place for you. The system has recorded you. The weight around your neck has finalized the shift. And as the group begins to move, you step forward with them, the dust rising gently around your legs, the morning sun brushing your shoulders. There is no announcement, no ceremony, just the quiet continuation of a day that has already decided what it will make of you. You move with the others, not exactly hurried, but no longer merely waiting. The morning has shifted from arrangement to motion, and your limbs remember a cadence that is neither wholly yours nor entirely foreign. Dust lifts in thin veils where feet disturb the ground, and it catches at the backs of your hands like a soft accusation. The wind that skates down the slopes smells of stone and sun, clean in the way a bruise is clean, and it slides across your face with an indifferent patience, reminding you that the hills have their own moods, and they will not be hurried. The settlement spreads outward in modest lines. Low wooden barracks, lean-to storerooms, racks of tools assembled with a careless competence. Everything looks as though it has been folded into the landscape and left to settle. The paint, if there ever was any, has gone pale. The ropes hang slack with the ease of long use, and the rope coils carry the faint metallic scent of ore. You notice details in a slow cataloguing way. The grain of a bench, the nick in a bucket, the frayed edge of a strap, small signatures of many hands that have conducted the same motions for years. These things are not ornamental. They are the grammar of the place, telling you how to move and when to stop. You brush a sleeve across your mouth because the grit gets curious. The talc of powdered stone finds the line of your throat and adheres there, as if trying to mark you in a way that will outlast your own memory. It's almost comic when you consider it, the hills marking you like an inventory tag. There is a dry smirk tucked somewhere under your ribs at the absurdity, but it slides away when the wind lifts again, scattering the thought like a loose scrap of paper. A woman, older, her face lined with methodical patience, passes with a basket balanced on her hip. Her movements are economical and precise. She does not look toward you, but you feel the practiced economy of her steps. She deposits the basket on a low table and walks away without haste. A child follows an older boy, their small hands empty for now. They trail at the edge of the adult world, allowed to watch the machinery without being pulled into its teeth. You register them like small, bright marks in a faded painting, then let your attention fold back inward. The wind presses against the settlement with an even, persistent pressure. It nudges at the edges of cloth tents, it tugs at the loose threads of woven sacks, and it slips through the cracks in shuttered windows with the authority of someone who knows the quickest shortcuts through stone. It carries a distant sound, the hushed clink of metal, the muted murmur of voices, the taut creak of a pulley, as if the hills speak in a language of small impacts and patient friction. Each noise is a metronome for the day's work, precise and unobtrusive. You find yourself moving to the tool rack. The tools are basic: chisels, hammers, wooden handles, worn smooth with years of clenching. You pick one up and feel the familiar balance in your palm. The metal is cool and slightly rough. It hums faintly against your skin when you test its weight. There is comfort in the predictability of tools. They do not ask for names. They accept your hands and return the favour with function. You carry the chisel as though it were a small, blunt truth you cannot argue with. A handler calls out soft and efficient instructions. The words skim the air like practiced birds. You fall into formation without thinking. The handlers are not cruel. There is little theatricality here. No raised voices, no visible threats. Yet their authority is absolute, because it is routine. Obedience is not demanded with anger. It is assumed with the cool clarity of a daily timetable. That is what is most wearisome. The way power here hides behind paper-thin civility, like a file folder that contains everything necessary to keep you moving. You join a small group moving toward the outer pit. The ground slopes gently down, and the wind plays differently here, thinner, carrying more mineral tang, as if the earth itself has exhaled something new. At the lip of the pit, a wooden railing stands, scarred by hands that pause there, day after day. You rest your palm against it and feel an imprint of usage, a map of pressure and repetition. Your hand fits the groove as if it were made for you alone, and you wonder briefly, with a tired sort of curiosity, how many hands have found the same small comfort. Workers file past, descending toward the mouth of shallower shafts with a steady rhythm. The air cools where the shadows lengthen. The difference between surface breath and the breath below becomes tangible. Some men pause to adjust straps, to exchange a single economical sentence about rope length or the fit of a harness. Conversation here is pragmatic. It exists to solve, not to console. Yet there is a subtext of shared endurance in the way they look at one another. A look that acknowledges the practicalities of survival without spending energy on sentiment. A pair of oxen stand tethered, their sides moving in the slow tide of respiration. They are calm, patient, and indifferent to human concerns. Their eyes hold a blandness that is oddly reassuring. Animals understand limits in ways humans sometimes forget. A handler brushes a hand along an ox's flank, a ritual of reassurance that, if anything in this place allows reassurance, feels like it might do the job. You watch the small scene with a spectator's stomach, attached, present, but oddly distant. The wind carries voices from beyond the immediate work. Somewhere, a bell-like tone rings once, soft, not urgent. Just a temporal punctuation. The sound is the kind that marks a shift, rather than incites panic. People glance up, assess their positions, and then move with the precise slowness of those who know their day, like the notes of a familiar song. You inhale and find the air thicker, with the scent of baked grain and metal. It is a nourishing smell, clinical in its simplicity, as though sustenance here is measured and meted, not celebratory. You are led toward a narrow passage where the earth has already been cut back into steps. The wind slows as you enter this minor corridor, muffled by stone on both sides. In that hush, sound seems more deliberate, a drop of water falling somewhere deeper, the faint rasp of leather against wood, the understated clack of a chisel being set into a worker's belt. It feels reverent and procedural at once, as if the hill itself is composing a loose, ongoing ledger. Someone brushes past you, and you catch their scent, sweat, dust, the faint tang of metal. It is unremarkable, almost medical in its neutrality. You notice small practical scars, calluses, a healed split in a knuckle, an old abrasion at the wrist. These marks read like an unreadable script, that nevertheless explains everything at a glance. Bodies here speak in the language of endurance and repair, and you, newly tagged and arranged, begin to learn that vocabulary with a careful, weary attention. The wind finds its way into the gaps of your clothing and slides along the skin of your neck, carrying with it the memory of sunlight and stone. For an instant, you imagine the wind as a ledger too, counting, cataloguing, moving along the entries of the hills. The thought is almost comfortingly abstract. Abstract things are safe to think about when direct feelings would be too heavy. You stop for a moment to watch a foreman examine a length of rope, running his fingers down the fibre with the slow scrutiny of someone who knows which threads will fail and which will hold. His face shows no drama, only concentration and a precise reserve. You feel the day settling around such small acts, inspection, adjustment, retying, each a quiet emergency, averted through technique. These tiny attentions are the invisible stitches holding the day's fabric together. As you step away from the passage, the wind picks up again, a steady, dry current that teases dust into the sunlight. You pull your cloak tighter, mostly out of habit, and let the moment fold into the next movement. There is no fireworks here, no prophecy, only the measured progression of tasks, the small assurances of routine, and the slow, inevitable business of being gradually worn down by sameness. The dry wind keeps its own counsel and moves on, carrying dust and the faint, metallic whisper of what lies beneath the skin of the earth. The path narrows, and the light thins as you move toward the opening where the earth breathes differently. Here the air is cooler, not the refreshing cool of shade, but the subterranean cool that smells faintly of old stone and forgotten rain. It slides outward from the shaft in quiet gusts, and each tiny inhale you take seems to collect a new layer of information. Mineral tang, a faint metallic sweetness, the tight, dry scent of centuries packed underfoot. It feels as if the hill itself is exhaling, and you stand in the arc of that slow breath, willing your mouth to match its rhythm. Around the mouth, people move with a calm that can only come from repetition. Their gestures are economical and exact. A careful knot tied twice, a strap adjusted with 2 practiced pulls, a chisel tested with the flick of a wrist. There is a kind of choreography to it, no flourish, no dramatics, only motions refined until they are almost invisible. You find yourself mimicking those motions naturally. Your hands remember shapes before your mind does. The chisel that felt new and foreign an hour ago now rests in your grip like a borrowed familiarity. A low wooden scaffold frames the shaft, scarred by time and use, Ropes dangle, coiled like sleeping snakes, ready to be called. A pulley creaks softly when a gust of wind passes, an idle sound that belongs to the place. Buckets stand in lines, their rims nicked, their metal dulled by long immersion in soil and grit. When your fingers touch the rim of one, the metal is cool and slightly tacky, as though retaining a memory of the last ore it carried. You think, irrationally, and with a small bleak amusement, that even the buckets here have occupational histories. An overseer walks the edge with a slow, watchful gait. He is not loud, his authority is a quiet current, the kind that moves things into order without a demonstration of force. His eyes slide over the gathered workers, over your tag around your neck, the way your shoulders sit under it, the angle of your hands, and then he moves on, making small adjustments in the arrangement of people, as one might rearrange pieces on a board that is constantly shifting. His presence is more administrative than theatrical. It keeps the day tidy. You approach the lip of the shaft. The cool air pours out in a thin, steady stream, and you feel it against your face like a cold hand. The opening is narrower than you expected, more intimate. It bends inward and vanishes into shadow, a short distance beyond sight. A rope ladder hangs at one side, its rungs smoothed by the weight of many hands. You glance down into the black throat and sense the compressed geometry of the space, stone pressed close, angles that force the body to shrink in on itself. It is a private geography designed for bodies to be measured and reshaped. A miner ahead of you kneels to fit his harness, fingers working swiftly. He looks up only briefly, his face lit with the flat concentration of someone performing a sequence of muscle memory. When he pulls himself into the first rung of the ladder, his movements are efficient and deliberate, like someone stepping through an old doorway. You watch the slow arc of his shoulders as he descends. The dark swallows him with a measured appetite. You understand in a way that bypasses surprise, that the hill will receive you in the same unhurried way. There is a sound that begins at the edge of perception and then grows, the muted drumming of tools against rock deeper within. It is never jagged, never abrupt, only the soft, repetitive punctuation of extraction. That sound seems to set the day's tempo. Even when other noises occur, the steady strike keeps the background steady, as inevitable and ordinary as a pulse. You find the cadence entering your bones. It asks nothing of you except that you keep time. A handler checks the strength of the rope and gives a curt nod. The movement is minimal but sufficient. It is the kind of affirmation this place uses instead of consolation. Another worker voices a terse instruction, and the group forms into a small unit. Those descending, those anchoring, those watching for slack or snag. The ritual is efficient enough to be almost ceremonial. No ceremony in the flourish, only in the exactness of function. You fasten your harness with fingers newly steady. The leather straps are worn where others have cinched them taut. You feel the lines cinch against your chest, an intimate, administrative embrace. There is no fanfare, no handshake, no spoken blessing, only the sound of buckles meeting and the soft, mechanical noises of preparation. It is a private kind of initiation, conducted without adjectives. At the edge, you take the first rung. The ladder creaks in a familiar register, a small honest complaint, and you descend. The world contracts around you, the outer light narrowing to a thin coin hole behind your head. The cool air clings to the back of your neck, and the scent of stone becomes an almost tactile presence. Each rung you pass brings you slightly further from the sky's indifferent brightness and deeper into the world that keeps its delights owed to others. The shaft narrows as you continue, the walls close enough that you can feel the history packed into them. Small flakes of rock sift across your bare arms, sandpapering skin with gentle persistence. When you pause, the darkness thickens in a way that makes the sounds you do hear, breathing, the distant tap of metal, feel amplified and purposeful. Conversation becomes a hushed thing here, economical and close-mouthed. Words are used sparingly for pragmatic ends, as though speech itself is a kind of expenditure. You reach a ledge, and the descent becomes horizontal, a long corridor where the light is only a distant memory, and torches are arranged at careful intervals. The flame is small and controlled, more for function than warmth. It casts a muted glow that makes the space feel intimate, and intimate in a bureaucratic way, as if everything is being archived, shelf by shelf. Shadows linger in corners like reserved documentation. The earth here seems to have accumulated time in layers. Marks from axes and picks cut ancient grooves. Old ropes are threaded through worn sockets. You trace these features with an attention that is almost professional. You catalogue them to know how they might influence your body later. For instance, low ceilings will mean stooped shoulders. Narrow passages will mean the slow compression of breath. You note these facts without drama, as if listing them in a ledger of conditions to be endured. The act of naming the small discomforts gives them the dim outline of rationality. Near the cutting face, the air tastes thicker with mineral and dampness. Slabs of broken rock are piled in patient heaps, and the ore glitters faintly with a reluctant luster. You run a finger along a piece and feel the cold metallic bite, sharp, small, precise. There is a tiny, bitter humour in the thought that such beauty will be polished and paraded elsewhere while you remain in the rough. It is a dry amusement that slides off like oil. It does not lighten the load, only clarifies its absurdity. You begin to work. The motions are straightforward and repetitive. Tap, scrape, pry. Each movement has been practiced into an evenness that resists thought. Your muscles take over, your hands know the sequence. You count strikes to keep time, not because numbers comfort you, but because counting organizes the sameness into manageable units. When the floor of minutes folds into hours, counting becomes a small anchor. The light casts things in subdued tones. Sweat gathers at the hairline and trickles down with a quiet insistence. The taste of metal lingers on the tongue, and your breath mixes with the musty odour of disturbed stone. Dust settles on eyelashes and in the creases of your palms. The air compresses and yields in even measures. It is an atmosphere that methodically rewrites the margin between you and your earlier life. Conversations, when they occur, are of the functional kind. A tool passed, a warning of a weak hold, a brief exchange about which vein may be more yielding today. There is little room here for rhetoric or complaint. The environment encourages economy. Yet among the practicality, there are small humane gestures, almost subliminal. A look that signals a shared joke about the day's poor yield, a hand that squeezes another's shoulder briefly before returning to its task. These gestures are private. They do not change the structure, but they remind you that small human threads weave through even the most procedural fabric. When you lift your head, the ceiling above seems immeasurably close. The tunnel presses lightly at your temples, as if reminding you of the spatial honesty of the earth. You continue to strike, and the rhythm returns. The slow punctuation of metal on stone, the steady exhale of the mine. A faint humour, the same dry, tired wit you have seen in others, surfaces briefly inside you and then recedes. It is a small human thing, a concession to sanity. Time in the mine is a measured process. Tasks begin and end like items checked off in some distant ledger, and the day advances in a series of small completions rather than dramatic events. You work with the quiet knowledge that the silver you coax from the rock will be shaped elsewhere into tokens of wealth and worship. The thought lands like a dull coin in your pocket, heavy, metallic, and without immediate use. Later, when you rest your back against the cool stone, torches sputtering their steady, modest light, you become conscious of the slow, bureaucratic certainty that defines everything here. Nothing happens suddenly. Everything is organized to continue. The mind's mouth closed and opened without malice, only procedure, and you move within it like an item placed precisely on a shelf. The air around you is filled with the echo of regularity, and you learn to calibrate your breath to the steady processes of extraction, delivery, and return. The ladder's rungs are familiar by now, a sequence your muscles accept before your thoughts catch up. Your fingers find the wood with a practiced certainty. Your feet search for the footholds, as if they too remember a map you no longer hold. Each step draws the daylight further behind you, until the sky becomes a thin coin of distant blue. The shaft narrows, and the temperature settles, the way a room cools when a window is closed. The world compresses, and so do you. Shoulders folding slightly, breath shortening into efficient measures. The air in the shaft tastes older than the air you left. It carries a metallic hint, as if the hill exhales fragments of its own composition. Dust rides the currents in soft threads, settling on your lips like the residue of long conversations you never had. You notice how your exhale becomes a quieter thing, parcelled into small puffs that do not disturb the surrounding stillness. Sound here has weight. It lands and stays. A chisel's strike does not merely echo, it annotates the dark with a slow, sure punctuation. Your descent becomes intimate with stone. The walls are close enough to feel the slow heat of the earth itself. Light, when it appears, is a controlled thing. A small flame in a bracket, a lamp set into a niche, more map than illumination. Torches are arranged, as if someone has considered the schedule of human sight and decided the minimum necessary. You move through pools of glow separated by shadow, and in the shadow you learn to register the small things. The faint trail of moisture along a seam, the way the stone flakes where a pick has taken a shallow bite, the thin, pale veins that might promise something worth the exertion. There is a rhythm to the descent that is nearly musical in its regularity. Leather creaking, rope whispering through hands, boots brushing against packed earth. Your body adopts it without negotiation. It is less an adoption and more a surrender to the practical arithmetic of being useful. You are useful here in increments, a hand to hold, a foot to steady, a pair of eyes to watch for loose stones. This usefulness is recorded in the efficiency of your motions, rather than in any spoken memory. At the deeper ledges, the shaft widens into tunnels, cut with intent. The passage is low. You find yourself stooping to keep your head from scraping the rough ceiling. The pressure of stone above is not a threat so much as a fact, a steady presence that shapes how you breathe and how you think. Even the act of lifting your chin feels like a small defiance against a patient compression. You learn quickly that the easiest way through is the way that wastes the least energy, because energy here is currency, and it is paid out in slow, exact portions. Work begins in small declarations. A foreman pins your group to a short stretch of face and marks a line with a thin scrape, an instruction in the logic of extraction. You step into the space and orient yourself to the face, how the veins run, where the rock seems stress-marked, where the light falls, and where it does not. The tools in your hands are extensions of a bureaucracy, chisels, picks, wedges, each with a specific ledger of force. Your strikes are economical, not ranting. Each blow is measured as though spoken into a ledger that records vibrations instead of words. Dust rises in the arc of motion and hangs half translucent around the immediate work. When you breathe it in, it tastes of the day and the day before, of many hands and many small resignations. It makes a thin paste on the roof of your mouth and settles into the grooves of your tongue like a tiny persistent record of place. Your throat learns to swallow around it without complaint. You find the habit of not asking for more air, more light, more explanation. Asking creates expectations. Expectations are an unnecessary expense. There is economy even in fatigue. Muscles that complain are simply noted, adjusted for by a change in stance or a slight redistribution of weight. Pain is catalogued and stored away as an efficiency problem to be managed. Tighten the grip here, change the angle there. You become the engineer of your own slow decrements. There is a tenderness to that management, almost tender in its sterile pragmatism. It is a dignity framed in metrics rather than rhetoric. Conversations in the dark are low and utilitarian, though within them small humanity survives. A man jests quietly about the day's meagre yield. The laugh is a dry, quick thing that does not linger. Another murmurs a practical tip. Chip along this vein, not that one. The seam will split better with an angled strike. These exchanges are not attempts at consolation. They are the exchange of techniques that make the day tolerable. Skills become a language of survival, each sentence a tool. At intervals, you lift your head to examine the lamp at the wall. The flame is steady, a disciplined mouth that does not ask to be admired. It throws amber rings that make the dust visible in the air, each particle catching the light and becoming briefly eloquent. The illumination does not beautify so much as render things legible. Your eyes adapt to the scale of visible truth. A small glint here, a loose stone there, the faint, telltale shimmer that suggests awe. You train yourself to notice the sort of modest details that will permit you to return to surface with less wear. When you pause, the silence settles like a patient blanket. You become aware of the sound of your own body committing itself to the task. The measured flow of blood at your temples, a minor wheeze when you shift position, the soft scrape where leather meets skin. The body, you realise, keeps its own ledger separate from the mind's. It tallies scrapes and tightness and the small eruptions of soreness and files them away in a folder labelled endurance. Occasionally, a distant shout carries down the tunnel. Brief, clinical, informative. It is not drama but instruction. A word about equipment, a note that a wagon waits above, that the next rotation is nearly due. Even the urgent sounds here are composed as memos. They do not rouse panic, they adjust behaviour. You listen and modify, conforming to an internal schedule that the hill orchestrates. You notice how the dark compresses personal history into short fragments. Names, faces, the texture of older days. They become like pages folded into a small packet you can carry. Extracting them is expensive, so you keep them folded, touching them occasionally like a small relic, but mostly conserving the energy it takes to open them. Your mind becomes adept at compartmentalizing, housing nostalgia in a compacted, efficient format that is accessible but not burdensome. The hours smooth into each other as your strikes continue, and the repetition shapes time into a flat plane where days differ by the angle of light in the corridor and the specific seams exposed. You learn to move along that plane with a kind of professional calm. The mine is an institution with a temperament that favours predictability. It rewards those who can be reduced to a set of reliable motions. That reduction is not violent in the theatrical sense. It is bureaucratic, subtle, a steady attrition of individuality into function. Every so often, you glance at the tag at your chest. The number is dull against the skin. It warms briefly with your exertion and cools when you pause. It is a small, constant presence that reframes every action as part of a recorded output. You find the metal comforts you in its bluntness. It does not demand more than the visible. It simplifies an unwieldy human into a unit that can be scheduled, measured, and replaced. When the foreman calls for a brief break, your shoulders drop reflexively. You lean back against the cool stone and inhale. The breath carries the accumulated taste of the day. Dust, iron, the faint trace of sweat, and you let it out slowly in a controlled, almost ceremonial release. There is nothing dramatic in the action. It is simply a habitual concession to human limits. The pause does not promise renewal. Only a small, manageable respite. You accept it with the weary gratitude of someone receiving rationed kindness. As the pause closes, the tunnel's dark seems less like a punishment and more like a determined environment that will outlast you. It will continue to persist, to demand, to record. Your work is a line within its script. The first steps into this dark have taught you how to economize breath, motion, and thought. They have shown you the quiet arithmetic of endurance. You return to your strikes with the mild, acquiescent resolve of someone who knows that the day's measures are modest and precise, and that is all they are allowed to ask. The rhythm arrives quietly, without ceremony, the way a draft slips under a door and becomes part of the room. You don't notice the exact moment your movements fall into alignment with the steady pulse of the mine, only that at some point the world settles into a narrow cycle. Scrape, breathe, shift, repeat. The pattern is plain, almost modest in its ambitions, and yet it holds you with a firm, unyielding patience. Your thoughts grow dim around the edges, softened by repetition until they lose their earlier sharpness. Whatever brightness they once carried is filed down into something serviceable. The tunnel absorbs your motions with the indifference of stone. Each scrape of your chisel becomes another small echo folded into countless others. The sound travels only a short distance before the walls smother it, as though the earth is curating which noises may linger. The echoes become markers of time in a place where time does not behave politely. Minutes stretch into wide, slow ribbons. Hours condense to a series of small aches that settle evenly across your shoulders, wrists, and lower back. There are no clocks to measure anything, only the private inventory of fatigue your body keeps. Every action becomes strangely procedural. You shift your weight because the stance demands it. You inhale because your body insists on another breath. You lift your tool again because the system has shaped your spine to anticipate that lift. None of it is dramatic. It all feels like a continuation of something that began long before you arrived. Even the dust at your feet seems older than the day, packed with the memory of years of identical motions performed by hands you will never see. Workers around you move in the same muted symmetry. Their faces are unreadable in the low light, not blank, just reduced to essential expressions. A man 2 arm lengths away wipes his brow with the back of his hand, a gesture so habitual it carries no particular emotion. Another adjusts a lantern hook, testing its steadiness with a tiny tap. Each motion unfolds with the same measured restraint, as though everyone has quietly agreed that the day requires only what must be done, nothing more. Your breathing becomes part of the ambient noise, slow, shallow, and pragmatic. The air you draw in tastes faintly of pulverized ore, and each exhale carries a thin haze that lingers before dissolving into the dimness. You become aware that you breathe differently here, not fully, not freely. The lungs learn to conserve, to make do. The air feels pre-used, like someone else has already sifted meaning from it, leaving behind only what your body needs for maintenance. There is a subtle hum in the depths of the mine, a low vibration that might come from distant picks or from the earth itself shifting in its sleep. It's not threatening, just present, a reminder that the hill has its own slow metabolism. Sometimes the hum grows slightly louder and you pause to listen, not out of worry but because the change breaks the consistency of sound. When it fades again, you return to the rhythm, as though the interruption were a misplaced comma in a long, unremarkable document. The work face reveals small variations in texture. Some stone flakes cleanly, coming away in neat, obedient shards. Other sections resist in stubborn silence, forcing you to angle the chisel differently. You learn the personality of each patch of earth, the same way one might learn the quirks of a tedious co-worker, respectfully, because there is no advantage in irritation. You adapt because adaptation is cheaper than frustration. The mine rewards those who adjust quietly. Your hands begin to throb with a dull insistence. It isn't pain exactly, just a constant reminder of motion, a kind of administrative pressure that notes each strike without complaint. The skin at your palms thickens slightly, stiffening into early callus. The formation feels procedural, as though your body is filling out a requirement, layer 1, layer 2, ready for inspection. You flex your fingers occasionally, not to relieve discomfort, but to maintain usefulness. Light from the lamps traces a thin sheen of sweat along your arms and catches in the dust, turning particles into slow-moving constellations. You watch them drift when you pause to wipe your forehead. They hang suspended for a moment before disappearing into the darker spaces. There is something quietly dignified about their brief shimmer, a small indifferent beauty created by people who will never be credited for it. At times, the tunnel becomes so still that you hear your own pulse beating at your temples. It knocks gently, as though asking to be acknowledged, not for urgency, but for presence. You give it a moment of attention and then return to your scraping. The rhythm folds around you again, patient as ever. Someone behind you coughs, a short, controlled cough that seems less like discomfort and more like a minor announcement. The sound settles quickly, tucked away by the walls. A few breaths later, you forget it entirely. The mind encourages this selective forgetting. It teaches you to let small disturbances pass without absorption. This is not the place for lingering over anything. Your mind begins to drift, but not toward memory. Instead, it drifts into a kind of soft accounting. The number of strikes needed to reach a promising seam, the shape of the stone you need to clear next, the feel of your muscles at the edge of fatigue. Thoughts shrink to technicalities, stripped of narrative. You are not absent, you are streamlined. The coolness of the stone at your side becomes a small anchor. Each time you shift slightly and feel its chill against your arm or shoulder, you are reminded of the constant temperature maintained by the underground world. It does not warm for you. It does not change mood. It simply holds its climate like a bureaucrat, holding a neutral expression through a long list of queries. Its consistency has a strange comfort. At least something here remains predictable. After a long stretch of labour, you pause to rotate your neck. The vertebrae realign with faint clicks, small mechanical confirmations that your body is still participating. You lean back gently and let your weight settle into the wall. The stone receives you without interest. Your breath deepens slightly before sliding back into the familiar, shallow cadence. Nearby, buckets are filled and lifted away in slow intervals. The workers who carry them do so with a kind of resigned grace, as though the weight is an old acquaintance. Their steps are soft, and the buckets clink in a subdued rhythm that blends with your own motions. The sounds overlap, forming a layered composition of metal, breath, and labour. None of it sharp, none of it hurried. Your mind begins to register the passing of time only through bodily cues, a tightening in the calves, a dryness in the throat, a stiffening at the base of the spine. These markers become your clock. When you try to estimate how long you've been here, your sense of duration dissolves into a vague expanse, as though the minutes have been rubbed out and replaced by an unbroken smear of activity. Even fatigue, when it arrives, is systematic. It comes not as a collapse, but as a soft recalibration. Your strikes growing fractionally smaller, your breath thinning just slightly. You adjust again, the way someone shifts a tool on a shelf to keep the line neat. The mind trains you to think this way, not about endurance, but about maintenance. When the faint call signaling rotation finally drifts down the tunnel, it filters into your hearing like a footnote you vaguely recall needing to read. You straighten slowly, muscles waking from their procedural trance. The sound does not bring relief, it simply marks a shift in tasks. You wipe the dust from your arms in methodical strokes and gather your tools. The echo of your work fades behind you as you move toward the next corridor. The rhythm remains in your limbs, a quiet momentum you cannot shed yet. The tunnel breathes around you, steady and patient, and you follow its exhale deeper into the labyrinth that has already rewritten your sense of day into something measured only in scrapes, breaths, and the quiet tally of your own endurance. The tools are waiting for you before you realise you're looking at them. Laid out in their quiet rows, metal dull from sweat and stone, handles smoothed into the shape of necessity. You pick one up because that is what the moment requires, not because you've chosen it. The weight settles into your palm with a kind of tired familiarity. It is neither heavy nor light, it is exact, as though it has always known the circumference of your grip. A faint vibration travels up your arm the moment you test its edge against the tunnel wall. It is a simple tremor, but it moves with deliberate confidence, travelling from your palm into your wrist, climbing the narrow ladder of your bones with the mild arrogance of something that has worn down thousands before you. You feel the tremor settle in your elbow, then your shoulder, a small announcement that the tool has begun its work. You realise, in a thin thread of amusement, that the tool seems more patient than the people who handle it. You begin to strike. The first contact is soft, a modest sound swallowed quickly by the stone. The second has more purpose. By the third, the vibration becomes part of your rhythm. Metal meets mineral and delivers the same reply every time. A short, blunt message that travels through your body like a note being filed. Each strike is less a gesture of effort and more an entry in a ledger that only the mind keeps. The tunnel absorbs everything. The scrape of metal dulls into a muffled shudder. The minute echoes drift outward and dissolve against the layered silence. Your breath becomes thinner as you fall into the movement. Lift, angle, strike, repeat. There is no need to think. Thinking takes energy, and the tools do not ask for explanations. They demand motion, and motion is simpler than thought. The metal feels colder now, even with your grip warming the handle. Iron carries a certain indifference, unemotional, unbothered by the skin wrapped around it. You adjust your hold slightly, shifting your fingers to avoid the roughest patch of the wooden shaft. The handle has absorbed the history of many hands. Yours joins the archive without ceremony. You work it the way you were taught, and the tool responds by showing you exactly how much of yourself you have left to spend. Other workers nearby move in their own cycles, variations of your rhythm, small differences in cadence shaped by years of repetition. Some strike harder, some softer, some with a craftsman's precision that seems almost graceful. But grace here is functional. No one wastes motion. The tools do not reward flourish, they reward constancy. You learn by watching the economy of your neighbours, the quick flick of the wrist that saves energy, the slight rotation of the chisel that encourages the stone to split along a more cooperative line. When your tool bites into a stubborn seam, the resistance sends a stronger tremor through your arm. It catches you just beneath the shoulder, a brief shock that makes the muscles clench in a reflexive flinch. You breathe in the stale mineral air and reposition the tool. This time you angle it differently, coaxing rather than confronting. The stone yields, grudgingly, as though acknowledging that you have learned something about persuasion. You feel the small victory, not as triumph, but as a minor reduction in anticipated strain. Your bones begin to thrum in a slow, quiet way. It's not pain exactly, more an ongoing conversation between your body and the tool, a mutual acknowledgement that neither of you is entirely fresh. Each strike is a gentle negotiation. You contribute force, the tool contributes wear. The agreement is silent but firm. You both understand your roles. Sweat forms where your fingers meet the wood, making the handle slick. You adjust your grip to compensate, wiping your palm against your thigh. The dust clings to the moisture, forming a thin layer of grit that feels strangely adhesive. You tighten your hold around the tacky surface, and the tool sits more securely in your hand. The texture is unpleasant but effective, a small reminder that comfort is not a priority here. Utility is always the first demand. In the thin lamplight, the tools around you seem almost animate. Their edges glint faintly when someone walks past with a lantern, as though they draw attention to themselves without meaning to. Some lay in neat piles, others in ungainly heaps. All of them appear ready, patient, resigned. You imagine them whispering among themselves in metallic tones, an absurd thought that briefly distracts you, then fades. Humour arrives like that sometimes, short-lived, dry, gone before it can offend the darkness. You strike again, and the vibration travels up your arm with a familiarity that borders on intimacy. It pulses through the bones of your wrist, climbs your forearm, pauses at your elbow like a polite knock. Your shoulder absorbs the remainder with a weary, procedural acceptance. You exhale slowly, the breath thin and functional. Inhaling deeper is possible, but wasteful. You keep the breath measured. The hours accumulate in your joints. You feel them collecting there, small increments of effort that stack like sheets of papyrus, layered and compressed. The ache is mild at first, then persistent, then familiar enough to ignore. Not because it lessens, but because your attention learns to budget itself carefully in this place. Pain becomes a background cost, accounted for but no longer consulted. The tools do not change, but you feel the changes in yourself with a quiet certainty. Muscles tighten and adapt, the rhythm becomes more ingrained. Your hands behave with increased automaticity, shaping themselves around the tool as though they were made to fit it. You sense your spine shifting subtly to accommodate the constant downward pressure. Bones strengthen in some places, complain in others. Each moment of work becomes part of a slow, inevitable reshaping. Occasionally, you pause to rotate your wrists, to reopen the joints and reassure yourself that mobility still exists. The tendons click faintly, small reminders that the body has not fully surrendered. You stretch your fingers out, feeling the pull along your knuckles. The lantern beside you casts a soft glow on your hand, illuminating the dust ground into every crease. You brush some of it away, only for more to settle almost instantly. The tool's surface warms where your thumb presses hardest. The warmth feels misleading, as though it belongs to you rather than the friction of labour. You trace the seam where metal meets wood, noticing the slight looseness that comes from long use. A craftsman somewhere forged this tool before placing it into circulation. You wonder briefly if they imagined the long chain of hands it would pass through, or if the idea of longevity was merely another part of the job. More stone gives way as you work, and the floor around your feet becomes littered with fragments. Some pieces gleam faintly with the promise of ore. Others look like meaningless debris. You push them aside with your boot, clearing space without reflection. The floor shifts slightly under the redistributed weight, small grains rolling against each other like a slow trickle of sand through an hourglass. Time in this form becomes visible. When you lift your tool again, the motion is slower, not weary, exactly, just deliberate, as though your body has chosen to conserve rather than rush. You find the balance in it, the equilibrium between exertion and endurance. You strike, and the familiar tremor runs its path up your arm. This time, it stops just shy of your shoulder, where a tired resignation absorbs it. The boundary between your fatigue and the tool's demands becomes clearer. The tool will continue without adjustment. You are the one who must recalibrate. Around you, the mine carries on. Workers shift positions, passing tools between them with quiet efficiency. Some trade their worn chisels for sharper ones. Others swap hammers with barely a word. You exchange a brief glance with someone across the tunnel. A mutual acknowledgement of shared effort, nothing more. No encouragement is offered. It isn't that people here lack kindness. It is simply that energy is rationed too carefully to spend on sentiment. When the call for the next task drifts through the passage, you lower your tool with a muted sense of completion. Not accomplishment, merely completion. You flex your fingers one more time, before letting them fall to your side. The chisel hangs in your grip, heavy now, in a way that doesn't come from iron alone. As you walk toward the next section, the tool remains in your hand, a familiar weight pulling gently at your arm. You feel its presence like a continuation of the work you have already done, as though the metal has claimed a small portion of you in exchange for the hours you've given it. You move on, carrying the tool with the calm, steady acceptance of someone who knows that in this place, the iron never changes, but you inevitably will. The shift in atmosphere comes so gradually that you barely register it at first. The sound of tools fades into a softer chorus, the rhythm of labour settling into a subdued hum. Somewhere in that muted blend of motion and breath, another presence threads itself through the tunnel. Light, measured, unhurried. You don't see it immediately. You feel it, the way one senses a draft from an unseen doorway. The overseers disperse through the mine like understated shadows, their movements unannounced. They never enter a space abruptly, they drift into it. At first, it's just the faint scuff of a sandal against stone or the quiet displacement of air as someone steps close enough to alter the temperature by a fraction. You keep working, but your senses shift, awareness sharpening not out of fear, but out of the mind's well-trained instinct for attention. Their presence carries no drama, no raised voices, no theatrical threats, just the steady, administrative gaze of individuals whose authority is rooted in routine. They walk with the same calm that a clerk brings to a desk stacked with documents. Each person in the mine, another sheet to be examined, approved, or corrected. Their silence is the kind that expects everything and forgives nothing. Not because it is harsh, but because forgiveness is simply not part of the system's vocabulary. You recognize them without looking. Their sandals make a different sound than the workers' boots, lighter, less burdened, as though the earth yields to them more easily. Sometimes a lantern they carry casts a broader glow, illuminating walls and faces with a clarity that feels almost invasive. The light doesn't linger long. It moves on, leaving behind the impression of having been weighed and measured. The overseer nearest you pauses just long enough to let his gaze skim across your posture. You don't lift your eyes, but you feel the subtle scan travel over your shoulders, the angle of your tool, the set of your feet. His approval is not spoken, it's simply the absence of correction. He moves on, footsteps fading, like a faint signature pressed onto an already crowded scroll. There is a strange exhaustion in being watched without being seen. Their indifference drains more than hostility ever could. Cruelty has edges, sharp, visible, predictable. Indifference has no edges. It moves like a soft mist, enveloping you in a way that makes you doubt whether your presence alters anything at all. The overseers do not need to notice you to ensure your compliance. The system functions as smoothly as a well-oiled pulley, and you are just another moving part. Occasionally, one of them stops to confer quietly with another. Their voice is low and almost delicate. They speak about productivity, not people, about output, not effort. Their words float gently through the tunnel, devoid of emotion, as if discussing stones rather than bodies. You hear fragments, this section, the next shift, a stronger support, phrases that paint the work in broad detached strokes. Your hand tightens on your tool as you resume striking the face of the rock. The vibration climbs your arm, and the overseer's presence settles somewhere behind your sternum. A mild tightening that never quite becomes discomfort, just awareness. You feel like an entry in a ledger that is constantly being updated from afar. Not erased, not emphasized, just maintained. One overseer kneels beside a bucket to examine its contents. His fingers sift through the pieces with a methodical gentleness, selecting a fragment of ore, turning it to catch the light, placing it back carefully. Nothing in his movement suggests approval or disappointment. He seems to be verifying the day's arithmetic. Once he stands, he walks away with the languid confidence of someone who has never questioned his place in this narrow, stony world. The workers respond to their presence in subtle ways. No one straightens dramatically. No one stiffens or trembles. Instead, there is a soft refinement of posture, a slight increase in precision, as though the overseers adjust the miners' rhythm without speaking. The environment itself reinforces the hierarchy. The overseers do not need to exert force. The tunnels do that for them, compressing motion, limiting escape, sculpting obedience through architecture rather than threat. You wipe your forehead with the back of your wrist. The dust mixes with sweat, forming a pale smear that lingers. Your breathing stabilizes again, soft and efficient. The overseers never ask if you are tired. The question does not exist. Fatigue is simply another statistic absorbed into the system. Your body is a resource, and resources are not consulted about their condition. They are measured. From deeper in the mine, you hear a quiet exchange. Two overseers discussing the stability of a support beam. Their conversation contains no urgency, only procedural clarity. The decision they reach affects everyone in that branch of the tunnel, but they speak of it with the calm detachment of men reorganizing a storeroom. That's the part that unsettles you most. The ease with which they handle your environment, your safety, your day, without once acknowledging the human cost behind each adjustment. When one of them steps close to check the angle of your work face, the lantern he holds casts your shadow against the wall, stretching your silhouette into an elongated version of yourself. The light exaggerates every motion, the lift of your arm, the tilt of your wrist, the small sway of your torso as you brace for the next strike. For a moment, you see yourself as they see you, a shape, a motion, a unit of labor in a space designed for extraction. He says nothing. He doesn't even pause long enough to justify the moment. He simply observes, recognizes adequacy, and continues onward, the light moving with him, your shadow shortening back to its practical dimensions. There's a relief in his departure, but not the warm kind, just the release of a pressure you didn't realize had gathered beneath your ribs. The tunnel swallows his light, absorbing it into the broader dimness. You hear his sandals retreat down the corridor, a soft tap, tap, tap that keeps its own neutral tempo. Another overseer approaches from a different direction, and the cycle repeats, a near silent sweep of observation, a moment of attention that feels more like an audit than a glance. Their movements remind you of a gentle but persistent wind, never forceful, always present, altering the environment by existing rather than acting. You imagine, with a dry sort of humour, that if they were to vanish suddenly, the mine would simply continue its work without interruption. The system is self-maintaining. The overseers are custodians of a machine that has learned to run itself. Each person within it, another cog. You return to your task, finding the rhythm again. Scrape, lift angle, breathe. The motion repeats until your muscles accept it without question. The overseers drift through the spaces between your breaths, cataloguing without comment. Their presence becomes background noise, like the long exhale of the tunnels or the gentle sprinkle of dust sliding from the ceiling. Your bones feel tired in a quiet, procedural way, not aching, not throbbing, just subdued. Each strike is logged internally as another small expenditure. The overseers do not see this. Or if they do, it leaves no impact worth noting. Exhaustion here is not exceptional, it is standard. Near you, an overseer stops to reposition a lantern, adjusting the angle to cast better light on the wall. He moves it with the same care someone might give to aligning an object on a shelf. The adjustment is slight, but it changes the way shadows fall across the rock. Good, he murmurs, not to you, but to the placement of the lamp. The word floats past you like a note written in the margin of a scroll. Then he moves on, his robe brushing lightly against the stone. Your work continues, and their supervision, soft as breath, yet solid as architecture, continues with it, quiet, constant, indifferent, reminding you, with every step they take, how little the system requires your presence to function, and how deeply it has absorbed you all the same. When the call for dinner reaches you, soft, precise, and unhurried, you move toward it as you move toward everything here, with the practiced compliance of someone following a daily script. The path to the eating area winds past the same stacked tools, the same coiled ropes, and the same worn benches you have learned to use. Nothing new disturbs your route. The smell that reaches you first is not food as you remember it from other lives, but the neutral, institutional scent of nourishment, prepared for efficiency. Boiled grain, watered down broth, the faint metallic veil that seems to belong to the hills themselves. You queue behind a handful of others, wrists brushing, shoulders close enough to count the rise and fall of breath in the one ahead. People stand without conversation. If words are exchanged, they are tiny transactions, an instruction about a tray, a note about the speed of the serving. Behind the table, someone ladles portions into coarse bowls with the careful economy of a scribe measuring ink. Their motions are exact. They dispense just enough to keep men moving, never so much that it encourages indulgence, never so little that the machine blunts too quickly. The bowls are plain, terracotta, stained with the residue of many meals. Your fingers close around one, feeling the warmth of the food through the clay. The contents are predictable. A thick mash of barley with small muted fragments of legume, and once in a rare while, a sliver of fish preserved in salt. The mash has the bland, dependable texture of something designed for caloric return, rather than pleasure. Its surface carries the faint, iron-like aftertaste that seems to linger on everything here. You lift the spoon robotically and bring the bowl onto your lips. Taste is a restrained thing underground. The dust has a way of schooling the tongue, dulling once potent flavours into a flat compliance. You chew slowly because speed wastes breath. You swallow not so much because you enjoy the food, but because your body requires the fuel. The porridge slides down with the metallic tang of water drawn from shallow cisterns that have learned the hillside secrets. In a different setting, you might have called it poor fare. Here you call it maintenance. There is no table manner grand enough to change the mood. You sit on a low bench, shoulders almost touching the person beside you. Silence stretches but for the small murmurs of spoons against clay and the occasional scrape when someone shifts position. Eating becomes a coordinated communal function, an efficient micro-ritual that refuels bodies to keep the larger ritual of the mind running. Conversation, if it arrives, is spare and practical. The quality of a certain seam, a note about the rope's condition, who took the last cupping of water. Sentiment is economized in the same way the food is. You drink from a communal jug. The water tastes of metal and history, like a coin turned in the mouth. It slides down with a quick heat and leaves the slightest film behind. It is clean enough to prevent instant illness, but not clean enough to efface the landscape's mark. Each swallow is functional. You note, almost clinically, the way your mouth seeks stronger flavours that are not there, and then returns unwillingly to a bland equilibrium. Sometimes an older man near you produces a small scrap of dried fish and offers it without ceremony. The gesture is understated, as if it were a ledger note passed between clerks. This is yours today. You accept it because generosity here is a utility. It lubricates relationships that keep people moving in small necessary ways. The strip of fish is salty, beyond what your parched tongue expects. For a second, the taste is sharp enough to register as a memory. Then it is gone. You are left with the recollection rather than the sensation, an echo that fills in nothing, but reminds you that pleasure is possible in faint, fleeting doses. There are small shared etiquettes around the food. No one eats the last spoonful without offering it first. No one makes a show of devouring more than they need. These practices are not moral choices, so much as strategies of reciprocity. They maintain balance. Each of these tiny courtesies is a subtle agreement that the day's ration will go round. They build a lattice of small obligations that keeps people from thinking about larger injustices. In the quiet of the dining area, these contracts feel as binding as any ordinance. You notice the way the servants move. Those who bring the food are composed, almost distractedly methodical, and their faces show none of the hunger that sometimes wrinkles the men they feed. Their detachment is not malice, it is efficient. The meal service itself seems designed to keep everyone functional and to minimize friction. There is a sort of clinical compassion in that, care as regulation. You accept it without gratitude. Acceptance conserves energy. As you eat, you think of the silver extracted from this hill. The thought arrives without theatricality. Another calm datum. The ore you chip, the dust that coats your lashes, these bowls of porridge, they're all parts of the same quiet economy. Metal core, human periphery. A bitter, small humour flits through you. The idea that the gods might wear the bright metal you rarely glimpse. That their altars may be polished with the product of your labour, while your pots remain unadorned. The joke is dry and private, and it does nothing to lighten your hunger. Children sometimes slip through the fringes of the feeding area, reaching for crumbs or holding a small bowl in hopeful hands. The adults don't shoo them away unless food is scarce. The children are part of the pattern, indicators of continuity. Their presence gives the place a strange human texture. Seeing them reminds you that this work is not merely a series of transactions. It also breeds small continuities. Lullabies hummed near lantern light, small hands learning to balance a bowl, the quiet way a mother wipes a child's dust-smeared face. These are not grand scenes of resistance. They are small acts of life, persisting within the mind's boundaries. You swallow the last spoonful and set the bowl down with a soft clack. The action is final, but it feels functional rather than ceremonial. Someone collects the bowls in a practiced sweep, stacking them without comment. The lids go on a cart. The leftover scraps are bundled and distributed in precise measures to certain workers. The math of hunger matching the math of the work. Nothing is wasted. Waste is costly here. A handler taps his stick gently to call attention. People rise not in hurry, but in the measured way of those who conserve motion. You leave your bench and step back onto the path that leads toward the shafts. The air outside the dining area hits you as if it were a change in tempo, a little cooler, a little less infused with the metal-tinged steam. You feel your body responding not only to nourishment, but to the familiarity of the routine, minutes edited into a schedule that leaves little room for surprise. You tuck the memory of the meal away in the same careful pocket where you keep other small facts. That the bread is coarse, that the water is metallic, that a scrap of fish once tasted like a story. The meal did its narrow job. It kept your muscles functioning. It did not satisfy a deeper hunger. That deeper hunger is catalogued separately, an item on a ledger you never expect to be cleared. As you move back toward the shaft, the dust reclaims you quickly, settling once more into the lines of your skin and the weave of your garments. The taste at the back of your mouth lingers faintly, the mineral residue of water, the salt of fish like an annotation. The food has not changed the shape of your day, but it has slightly adjusted the mechanics of your body. A little more strength in the limbs, a fraction more patience in the joints. That is all it is permitted to do. The overseers watch from a distance as the groups reconvene, a matter-of-fact survey rather than a personal assessment. You take your place in the line, the tag at your chest catching the light for a fraction of a second. The day's work calls again, and you answer, more functional than willing, propelled by the thin, steady calories that were dispensed without taste and accepted without complaint. When the day loosens its grip and the workers drift back toward the barracks, the shift feels less like release and more like a change in dimness. The tunnels let go of you slowly. their breath still clinging to your clothes as you follow the narrow path upward. Lanterns flicker along the way, their flames unsteady in the slight drafts that slip through the cracks of the wooden frames. You step through the last bend, and the open air touches your face, but even the sky seems subdued, its colours dulled by dusk settling into the hills, like a worn blanket being drawn over a tired body. The barracks stand in a long row, their walls warped by heat and wind, their roofs sloping downward as though resigned. The doors hang crookedly, but still close well enough to keep most of the night chill out. You walk toward the one assigned to you and feel the soft grip beneath your sandals, dust rising around each step, even at this hour. Everything here retains the memory of the mine. Even the evening breeze carries a faint metallic whisper. Inside, the light is minimal, just a few oil lamps with wicks trimmed short to conserve fuel. Their glow is thin and amber, casting shadows that stretch lazily across the packed dirt floor. Wooden bunks line the walls in two uneven tiers. Some are empty for the moment, others hold quiet bodies already curled into shapes of fatigue. The boards creak under shifting weight, each sound sliding into the room like another breath added to a long archive of weary nights. You take your place on your bunk. The mattress is nothing more than a layer of straw, flattened into a stiff mat by countless sleepers before you. It rustles faintly as you lie down, a muted sound that seems more ritual than comfort. The air is warm and heavy, dense with dust that has been carried in on clothes and skin. You feel it settle into your hair, coat your eyelids, gather at the corners of your mouth. It is the same dust you breathed below ground, repurposed for the night. Sleep begins as a slow sinking, not a descent into rest, but a dim, gradual fade at the edges of consciousness. You close your eyes, but the darkness behind them feels almost identical to the tunnels, compressed, grainy, motionless. A few murmurs drift across the barracks, two men trading short sentences about rope lengths, someone giving instructions for the morning, a low hum of private thoughts spoken aloud. These murmurs are soft enough to coexist with the quiet, creating a tapestry of half voices that the mind learns to filter without effort. Your breath settles into the same shallow rhythm you used underground. Deep breathing feels unnatural here. The air is too thick, too shared, as if each inhale must be measured to avoid tipping the balance. The ceiling above is low, and even though you can't see it clearly in the dimness, you sense its closeness. The room presses down in a familiar way, another structure meant to house bodies efficiently, not comfortably. At some point, sleep touches you, but only lightly. It never claims you completely. It hovers the way dust hovers in lamplight. Present but never solid, you drift in and out of awareness, your mind slipping between fragments of memory and impressions of the day. A striking tool lifting, a lantern swinging, the slow, rhythmic sound of footsteps in the dark. None of these form dreams. They simply echo in your half-sleep, repeating themselves like entries copied from one tablet onto another. When your eyes open again, there is no sense of having travelled anywhere. You feel exactly as you did before closing them. Tired, weighted, caught in a shallow pool of exhaustion that refuses to deepen into true rest. You shift on the straw mat, searching for a pocket of softness, but the mattress offers only its thin, unyielding surface. A small ache blooms at the base of your spine, the same ache that follows you from the tunnels each day. It will lessen when you stand, but only because motion distracts from it. Someone nearby turns in their bunk, and the wood produces a long, low creak. The sound blends with others. The faint cough of a man clearing dust from his throat. The scratch of someone shifting their blanket. The soft click of beads, as someone fingers a small token meant to remind them of home. These sounds become a strange lullaby, unintended, utilitarian, but rhythmic enough to lull you back toward the shallow edge of sleep. You feel the room breathe around you. Not in a unified way, each sleeper has their own pace. But together, the breaths create a kind of ambient tide, rising and falling with uncoordinated consistency. You settle into that tide, letting it hold you in a suspended state that is neither fully restful nor entirely waking. Your thoughts drift again, loose and quiet, like stray grains of ore shifting on a pan. The lamps burn low. Their glow diminishes gradually, the flame shrinking into a pinpoint that flickers uncertainly before steadying again. You watch one of them from your bunk, the tiny flame dancing behind a film of dust on the glass. It mesmerizes you, not for its beauty, but for its predictability. Even the lamps follow a schedule here, dimming in slow gradients as the night stretches thin. The dryness of the room becomes more noticeable with each breath. You swallow, feeling the scratch along your throat. The water jug near the door sits untouched. No one rises for it unless absolutely necessary. Even in the dark, movement is energy best preserved. You let the dryness linger, accepting it as part of the night's texture. A sip would help, but not enough to justify the effort. As the hours slide by in their muted procession, the stillness deepens. Bodies shift less frequently. The murmurs fade. The creaking bunks settle into long intervals of quiet. The air grows warmer, almost stagnant, as though the room itself is tired of circulation. Your limbs grow heavier, but your mind stays strangely alert, perched at the boundary between sleep and awareness. Each time you drift too far toward rest, some minor sound pulls you back, a sneeze, a soft moan, the snap of straw beneath a turning shoulder. It is not startling. It simply reminds you that you share the space with many others whose exhaustion mirrors your own. Eventually you stop trying to sleep. You let your eyes close and allow yourself to exist in the fog of half-rest, a compromised state the mind has taught you to accept. In that twilight of consciousness, even the sounds outside seem muted, the distant clatter of a bucket, the shuffle of a late-returning worker, the faint whistle of wind moving aimlessly across the roof. These noises blend into the drone of your thoughts, becoming indistinguishable from the room's ambient hum. You exhale slowly, feeling the weight of the day settle deeper into your bones. Your fatigue does not lift, it simply shifts shape, redistributing itself so it feels manageable enough to carry. You tell yourself that this is rest, not because it is, but because the mind adapts to definitions when alternatives do not exist. A thin streak of morning light eventually forces its way through the gaps in the wooden wall. It is pale, almost apologetic, barely enough to illuminate the room. But it signals movement. Bodies stir around you, waking with the same tiredness they carried into sleep. The fog of the night clings to your mind, refusing to lift fully, but you rise anyway, guided more by obligation than readiness. You stand, joints clicking softly as they reacquaint themselves with motion. The straw mat rustles behind you, settling back into its habitual shape. You gather your clothes, brush the dust from your arms, and step out of the barracks into the morning that already feels spent. The night has returned exactly what you gave it. Just enough energy to be useful, not enough to be renewed. The morning light barely grazes your skin before you're led back toward the shafts, its softness fading quickly against the familiar descent. Whatever quiet the night offered slips from you as you follow the line of bodies moving with the calm inevitability of a tide returning to shore. The path narrows, the wooden beams creak under the first touches of the day, and the chill that rises from the mouth of the mine settles against your ankles like a waiting thought. You step downward, and the air changes long before the light does. It grows stale in increments, layered like old parchment, worn thin at the edges. Each breath tastes recycled, as if passed through countless lungs before finding its way to yours. You inhale, and the air feels tired. You exhale, and the breath comes out heavier, tinged with the faintest notes of dust. It is not suffocating, but it asks something of you. a small, constant contribution of effort. The deeper tunnels require a different kind of attention. The light from the surface gives up quickly, receding into a grey wash behind you. Faint lamps mark the way forward, each flame burning with a stubborn restraint. Shadows settle thickly between them, shaping the corridor into alternating strips of dimness and amber glow. Your eyes adjust to the pattern before your mind does, learning to navigate the uneven terrain without thought. You pass a cluster of workers adjusting a rope along one of the support beams. Their movements are slow, deliberate, conserving energy the way one conserves precious water. Each man breathes with a measured cadence, steady, shallow inhalations that seem almost synchronized with the rhythm of the tunnel itself. No one wastes breath on conversation. The air is too thin, too valuable to expend on anything unnecessary. Deeper still, the walls narrow, and the temperature rises just slightly, as if the stone itself is exhaling warmth stored during the long hours of the day. You press your palm briefly to the rock as you pass and feel its texture. Rough, dry, alive in the strange way that inanimate things become alive when they shape your reality. It reminds you that the space around you is not empty. It is a slow-moving organism made of pressure and absence. Breathing becomes a task, not a struggle, but a responsibility you must manage carefully. Inhale too deeply and the dust scratches your throat. Exhale too forcefully and you lose air you will need seconds later. Your respiration settles into a practical pace, as if the lungs have been instructed to operate on minimal expenditure. The body listens, always eager to obey the rules that make survival easier. The miners ahead of you bend their heads under a low passage, and you follow suit, feeling the ceiling brush close. The tunnel is a long, narrow corridor, carved not only by tools but by necessity. Air currents twist through it in thin, reluctant drafts, carrying the faint sounds of iron striking stone from deeper in the labyrinth. Those echoes bounce lightly along the walls, soft, regular, strangely soothing in their predictability. Your steps are careful but steady. The floor is uneven, scattered with fragments of rock recently chipped away. Each footfall creates a small puff of dust that floats upward before dissolving into the stale darkness. You become hyper-aware of the warmth inside your own chest, the slight burn of your lungs working a little harder than they prefer. It is not pain, merely a reminder that the tunnel doesn't give freely. You reach the deeper station where your group gathers. A few lanterns hang from wooden brackets, their light thin and uneasy. Tools rest against the walls, arranged in neat disorder. A man nearby lifts his pick and tests its weight, the motion releasing a small cloud of dust from the handle. He glances once into the darkness beyond, as though acknowledging the presence of something that neither helps nor hinders him, just watches. When you lift your own tool, your body registers the weight with a flicker of memory. Muscles recall what is required before your mind articulates it. The air presses against your ribs with faint insistence, a quiet suggestion to pace yourself. You strike the wall with controlled force, dust breaks free and floats upward, catching the lamp's glow for a brief moment before drifting into shadow. The work takes on a different character here. Each motion is slightly slower, slightly more calculated, aligned with the narrow oxygen supply that the deeper tunnels grudgingly offer. You strike, breathe, shift, breathe, scrape, breathe. The breath is the most measured part of the cycle. Too fast and you grow dizzy. Too slow and your muscles falter. The balance becomes a private discipline, a small ritual carried out hundreds of times through the day. Someone coughs behind you, a short dry sound, quickly stifled. No one reacts. Coughing is simply one of the noises the mind produces, as common as the clink of metal or the rustle of cloth. Another man clears his throat and resumes working, his movements as calm as if he were sweeping a floor. The air weighs on everyone, but no one speaks of it. The tunnels are not interested in sympathy. As you continue, a faint ache begins at the edges of your chest, a reminder of how much work your lungs are doing just to maintain the pace. It isn't alarming, it is expected. You let the discomfort settle where it is, acknowledging it the same way you acknowledge the warm handle of your tool or the dust on your skin. Another line in the day's quiet ledger. Your breath becomes part of the tunnel's rhythm. You stop noticing the dryness of your mouth or the heaviness of the air. They become details absorbed into the atmosphere, the same way the shadows absorb sound. The environment teaches you how to exist within it, not comfortably, but efficiently. During a short pause, you lean against the wall and press a palm over your sternum, feeling the faint vibration of your own heartbeat. The beat is steady, unfazed, as if it has accepted the thin air as simply another parameter in its calculations. You take the chance to stretch your shoulders, feeling the tightness release in small increments. No one rests long. The deeper tunnels do not encourage idleness. A lamp flickers, casting strange shapes along the walls. For a moment, the stone seems to breathe with you, its surface swelling and sinking with the play of light. You blink and the illusion vanishes, replaced by the familiar constancy of mineral and shadow. You realize that fatigue creates its own visions. Nothing fantastical, just small distortions in the edges of things. Your mind quiets in a way that feels almost functional. There are no spare thoughts crowding the edges of consciousness. Everything narrows to the immediate. Your tool, the stone, the air that must be rationed. Even memory becomes streamlined, reduced to impressions rather than narratives. The mind shapes thought the same way it shapes stone, by removing what is not necessary. A breeze moves through the passage, thin and cool, carrying with it a hint of surface scent, dry grass, distant firewood, a whisper of something less stale. It lasts only a moment, passing through like a visitor who doesn't intend to stay. You inhale, recognizing the faint relief, but not lingering on it. The deeper air reclaims you quickly. When the time comes to shift positions, you rise with careful steadiness. Standing too quickly is a mistake few workers repeat. The dizziness comes abruptly in such moments. You pace your ascent, letting your breath guide you upward, and follow the others to the next section of wall. The lamps are spaced differently here, the light scattered in irregular pools. Shadows knit themselves tightly in the recesses between them. The deeper you work, the more the air settles. A quiet, unspoken agreement between your lungs and the environment. Each breath is a small effort, perfectly calibrated. The work continues in its slow, inevitable rhythm. Your movements grow smaller but sharper, conserving strength without sacrificing precision. Your mind remains clear enough to keep your body aligned, but muted enough not to interfere. As the hours pass, your chest grows heavier, not with panic, but with the steady accumulation of the day's breathing. Every inhale feels like opening a door that resists slightly. Every exhale feels like closing it gently. You adapt. The body always does. When the shift finally moves upward again, you feel the change in the air before you see the light. It is marginal but unmistakable. A touch more space in each breath, a whisper of freshness that nudges the lungs into a slightly fuller expansion. You follow it the way a plant follows light, without celebration. The tunnels release you with the same impartiality with which they received you. The weight of the air lifts, but only enough to remind you that even breathing can feel like labor when the earth decides to keep most of the oxygen for itself. The air grows easier as you move out of the deepest passage, but not enough to feel like relief, just enough to lend a small flexibility to your breath. The dim lanterns along the wall cast a broader circle of light in this stretch of tunnel, and within that circle, workers gather around baskets filled with the day's fragments. The ore lies in muted heaps, unassuming and dull, a greyish mixture of stone and vein that gives away very little of what it will eventually become. You kneel beside one of the baskets and rest your tool against the wall. Your fingers sift through the coarse shards, separating what is merely broken rock from what has the faint metallic glint. At first glance, there is little difference, but the fingertips learn to identify texture before the eyes do. Some pieces are smooth in a way that feels unnatural for stone, slick, cold, almost oily. Others resist the touch, gritty and crumbly. You sort without hurry, guided by the learned instinct that develops when your hands spend more time with ore than with anything living. Each piece you set aside carries a quiet significance. You don't think about temples or coinage as you touch them, but a part of you is aware of the distant destinations these fragments will eventually reach. The irony floats somewhere in the background of your thoughts, not sharp enough to wound, just a thin thread of awareness. The beauty in these raw bits of mineral is potential, not presence. They shine for the world above, not for the people who bring them into existence. A fellow worker beside you lets a piece of ore slip through his fingers, watching it thud softly into the basket. He shakes his hand once, wiping the dust on his thigh. The gesture is practical, unremarkable. You mimic him without thinking, brushing your own palms clean before taking another handful. The dust clings anyway, embedding itself into the creases of your skin like something determined to stay. Nearby, two men tip a full basket into a larger bin. The pieces clatter against each other, a sound that is strangely lively compared to the muted noises of labour. The bin will be hauled upward later, where others will crush, wash and smelt the material into something closer to refinement. You imagine the journey in fragments, flames bright enough to blind, furnaces glowing, molten streams poured into shapes defined by someone else's purpose. You picture the silver emerging brighter and cleaner, as if all the dust and sweat from the tunnels never touched it. You work quietly, your movements fluid from repetition. The ore feels heavier than it should, weighted by the thought of its future. You picture a trader weighing a silver coin in a marketplace, the sun catching its gleam. You imagine a priest setting a polished vessel beneath the gaze of a statue. Perhaps a wealthy family fastening silver clasps on their garments, admiring the way they catch the light from their oil lamps. All those moments rely on the material your hands are combing through now, yet none of them rely on the memory of the hands themselves. The tunnel hums with subdued motion. Workers shift positions, trade baskets, nod over small piles. Conversation is rare here. Sorting demands its own kind of focus. Every now and then, someone hums under their breath, a low, tuneless sound that floats in the thick air like a flicker of warmth. It doesn't break the monotony, it simply softens it. You pick up a piece that catches the light more than the others. It's still rough, still trapped in stone, but the faint shimmer along its edge carries a hint of its future brilliance. You turn it over in your hand. For a brief moment it resembles the kind of beauty people admire in polished metal. A cold radiance, a promise waiting to be released. But here, in your palm, it is unpolished and indifferent. Its value is potential, not presence. You place it gently into the basket designated for richer ore. The work continues in a slow, unbroken loop. Each piece sorted becomes part of a distant narrative that you will never witness. The thought settles over you, not painful, but clarifying. You labour in a system measured by outcomes you are not invited to enjoy. The world above will praise the silver without thinking of the tunnels where it was coaxed from obscurity. A man joins you on the ground, lowering himself with a sigh that sounds more like resignation than fatigue. His eyes flick over the ore, his hand already reaching out to sort. He works differently from you. Not slower or faster, just with small nuances shaped by years of habit. His fingers move in a subtle rhythm, pressing, weighing, flipping. The ore responds as if recognizing his touch. He doesn't speak, but occasionally you catch him studying a piece before letting it fall. His expression never changes, but something in the way he lingers over certain fragments suggests a memory. Perhaps he once saw something made from the metal he handled, or perhaps he imagines it the way you do, abstractly, quietly, without expectation. Your hands begin to ache, but the ache is mild, the type that has become familiar enough to ignore. You roll your shoulders gently, feeling a soft crackle in the joint. The dust rises with your motion, catching in your hair and clinging to the sweat along your neck. It feels strangely intimate, as though the tunnel is reminding you of its presence. When your basket is full, you lift it carefully and carry it toward the collection point. The weight pulls at your arms, steady and insistent. You place it down, among others, and return for another. The motion repeats without exhilaration or dread. Each trip is simply the next item in the day's long list of tasks. One of the overseers stands near the collection bins, observing with his usual understated detachment. His gaze passes over your basket, pausing for only a moment before sliding on. The ore is judged valuable or not. The person carrying it is not part of that calculation. You find a kind of strange comfort in being overlooked. It means your actions fit seamlessly within the routine, neither exceptional nor deficient. As you kneel again to continue sorting, a sliver of thought surfaces, light, almost humorous. You imagine one of your pieces being hammered into a coin that will pass through 100 hands. You picture someone turning it in their fingers, testing its weight, perhaps biting its edge to check its purity. A gesture so small and thoughtless, one you will never see, yet built on the weight you carry now. The humour is dry, but it lingers just long enough to cool the heaviness in your chest. The lamps flicker as someone adjusts the wick. Shadows rearrange themselves across the piles of ore, the shapes shifting with quiet authority. The light makes the better pieces gleam faintly, hinting again at their future brilliance. You watch them for a moment, feeling the small tug of irony that accompanies their shimmer. A beauty waiting to be born from a place where beauty is not meant to thrive. You return to the rhythm. The ore moves through your hands in steady increments, each piece sorted with the care of someone cataloguing items in a long-forgotten archive. Your fingers scrape against rough edges. Your palms collect tiny cuts that sting briefly before fading into the background of sensation. The work does not demand perfection, only accuracy. The tunnel accepts both your mistakes and your successes with equal indifference. Hours pass without distinction, marked only by the shifting temperature and the slight dimming of the lamps as they burn through their fuel. When the time comes to gather the last of the baskets, you feel the repetition settle into your muscles like a second skin. You stand, brushing the dust from your clothes out of habit rather than vanity. More dust rises in reply, as if reluctant to let you go. You carry the final basket to the collection point, feeling its weight balanced in your grip. The ore inside glints softly, small hints of brightness trapped in dull stone. You know where those glints will go, even if you never see the journey. You know how they will shine when they reach hands that will never feel the grit of the tunnels or the dryness of this air. The irony settles lightly, almost peacefully. You lift the basket, set it in place, and step back into the shadows with the quiet understanding that the brilliance you help create will always belong to someone else. The rhythm of sorting lingers in your fingertips long after you rise from the last basket. It clings to the small muscles in your hands as though the motions have carved shallow grooves into your bones. When you step away from the ore piles, the tunnel accepts you back into its dim pulse without comment, the lamps flickering with a tired steadiness that mirrors the mood of the bodies moving beneath them. You follow the corridor deeper into its familiar constriction. The walls press in with their usual indifference, and the floor seems to shift just enough to remind you that the ground here is never entirely settled. Your footsteps settle into the communal cadence shared by everyone around you. It is not a pace you decide, it is one you absorb, the way dust settles into cloth without announcing itself. Thoughts begin to smooth out into long, narrow strips that fit neatly into the mind's rhythm. The edges that once caught on distant memories grow dull. You notice this not with alarm, but with a faint curiosity, as if watching a metal tool lose its shine through use. The mind shapes itself to its surroundings, and these surroundings prefer simplicity. The complexity of earlier days, names, places, desires, narrows into the manageable dimensions of motion, breath, and task. Even your internal commentary changes. Where once you might have filled the quiet with reflections or private calculations, now you find yourself thinking in terms of actions. Lift, carry, sort, return. These words are not commands. They are categories, efficient and calm. They help you preserve something essential by letting go of the excess. There is a strange comfort in the reduction. Around you, other workers move with the same quiet surrender. You begin to notice the subtle humour that flickers in their expressions. A humour born not from joy, but from mutual endurance. Someone raises an eyebrow when a lantern sputters its complaint, and the man next to him gives a tiny, amused huff, the kind that doesn't require breath. A worker shakes dust from his hair with a theatrical flick, earning a faint smirk from another. None of it breaks the atmosphere. It adds texture to it, a small acknowledgement that misery, repeated long enough, becomes almost predictable. You share in that tired humour without needing to vocalise it. A glance is often enough. A sigh can communicate an entire paragraph. This is not camaraderie in the warm, celebratory sense. It's a recognition of mutual place within the same mechanism. You exist beside one another, like tools arranged on a bench, separate but aligned by purpose. Your own sigh escapes as you settle into the day's next task. It is soft, more an exhale than a complaint. Someone nearby nods almost imperceptibly, as if to say, "Yes, the weight sits there for me too." That acknowledgement carries more comfort than any spoken reassurance could. Words feel heavy here. Glances feel efficient. You lift a piece of ore to examine its texture, your fingers moving with careful predictability. The repetitive motion offers a small anchor, something you can rely on. You begin to find small patterns. The way one type of rock breaks cleanly, the way another crumbles into powder. These patterns shape your thoughts as well. The mind becomes a chisel, carving smooth pathways through the long stretches of labour. It strikes you that the mine encourages a kind of quiet, internal editing. Parts of yourself that served little purpose here gradually fade, worn down by the day's requirements. Pride dissolves first, not in humiliation, but in irrelevance. Then impatience wears away, ground down into a patient endurance. Even curiosity shrinks to manageable proportions, focusing not on abstract questions, but on the immediate. How to conserve breath, how to shift weight to spare a joint, how to time emotion so the day feels less abrasive. The erosion is slow, steady, almost benevolent in its smoothness. You become someone easier to manage, not because you have been broken, but because you have adapted. The thought is neither comforting nor disturbing. It simply is. A worker next to you wipes a line of dust from his cheek with a weary flourish, as if conducting an invisible orchestra. You allow yourself a tiny grin, the kind that does not reach your eyes but softens the edges of your face. He notices, gives the faintest shrug, an acknowledgement of a shared absurdity. Even in a place like this, small gestures survive. They are not rebellion, just reminders. Each hour folds seamlessly into the next. You notice how your sense of time shifts, the minutes stretching and contracting like lungs adjusting to a deeper tunnel. You do not measure the day by the sun or the length of shadows. Instead, you measure it by the repetition of actions. When your shoulders begin to ache in a specific way, you know the afternoon is beginning. When your calves tighten, evening is approaching. Your body becomes a clock wound by the tunnel itself. During a short moment of respite, you lean against the wall. The stone presses coolly against your back, a comfort made more soothing by its consistency. The texture is rough enough to remind you that you are still awake, still present. You tilt your head upward and let your eyes close. The smell of dust and mineral hangs around you like a thin curtain. It no longer feels intrusive, it feels routine. A distant laugh reaches you from somewhere down the corridor. Not a joyful laugh, just the dry, slightly incredulous sound of someone reacting to a minor absurdity, perhaps a dropped bucket or a misplaced tool. The sound floats for a second, then dissolves into the low hum of work. You can't help but exhale through your nose, a gesture close enough to amusement that it momentarily lifts the heaviness in your chest. You return to your task with the steadiness expected of you. Your hands move automatically now, guided by habit rather than effort. The oar shifts in your palms with a familiar weight, and your wrists adjust naturally to its demands. The movements feel less like labour and more like participation in a long, ongoing process that doesn't require your identity, only your presence. At some point you become aware of how your name, once a defining shape in your mind, now feels thin, almost transparent. You rarely hear it spoken, you rarely think it. Instead, the number on your tag becomes the identifier that the day references. It hangs against your chest with the calm assurance of something that will outlast your memories. You touch it occasionally, not with attachment, but with acknowledgement. Even your posture changes. You carry yourself with a softened alignment, conserving strength where you can. Your shoulders droop without collapsing. Your steps shorten without faltering. The body learns efficiency. The mind follows. Together they become part of the mind's quiet arithmetic. In a rare fleeting moment, you consider the person you were before the tunnels. The thought arrives faintly, like a reflection, caught in a puddle, disturbed by footsteps. You glimpse fragments, a sound, a place, a gesture. But the memory feels like it belongs to someone you once heard about, rather than someone you were. The mind's repetition has smoothed the edges of that identity until it fits more easily into the narrow spaces of the present. You carry on, your motions becoming smaller, cleaner, more synchronized with the ambient rhythm of the corridor. The deeper you slip into this pattern, the less sense it makes to resist. Resistance requires energy. Compliance requires only continuation, and continuation is something your body has become exquisitely trained to provide. A fellow worker offers a tired half smile as you pass him a tool. You return it with the faint up-tilt of your lips. These moments feel like the last remnants of individuality. Simple, understated exchanges that acknowledge you are still a person, even if the mind prefers to treat you as a moving part. The day stretches into its long, muted conclusion. Your thoughts feel smooth now, pared down to essentials. Not hollow, just economical. The mind expects function, not reflection, and you find yourself meeting that expectation with surprising ease. As the lamps begin to dim along the corridor, your body follows their lead. Your movements slow, your breath settles. You drift toward the next section of work, with the calm acceptance of someone who has become a quiet extension of the tunnel itself. And in that gentle surrender, you recognize the erosion, the slow reshaping of your inner landscape, carried out not by force, but by repetition, dust, and the muted rhythm of a world that does not need your name to use your hands. The dim corridor stretches ahead in its familiar, unbroken line, and your steps fall into place almost without direction. The lamps cast their soft, trembling halos along the walls, each circle of light dissolving gradually into the next. Somewhere in that gentle sequence, you sense the passage of years, not as a dramatic revelation, but as a slow accumulation, a steady layering of dust upon dust. The same routine, repeated so faithfully, smooths the edges of time until it feels less like a march and more like a low, continuous hum beneath your ribs. You move through the tunnel as though you have always belonged to its rhythm. The air wraps around you with its muted chill, touched by the scent of mineral and sweat, and your lungs adjust without hesitation. There is no longer a distinction between days or seasons. The changes happen quietly, slight fluctuations in temperature, a new lamp installed, a support beam reinforced, a face you once recognized showing a little more wear. Everything shifts in increments so subtle that you accept them before you realize you've noticed. Years pass like this, embraced by stone, guided by routines that have worn themselves into the fabric of your bones. The ore changes shape in your hands. The dust rises and falls in soft clouds. The tools wear down their handles through the pressure of your grip. You measure time, not by the sun's movement, but by the familiar aches that return with predictable precision. A stiffness in the knees announces mid-year. A deeper throb in the wrists suggests the turning of another cycle. The body becomes its own calendar, keeping time through small deteriorations. You pause near a wall where the rock has been scraped smooth through years of leaning. The surface feels cool under your palm, its texture faintly polished by the countless brushes of tired shoulders. You stand there for a moment, letting the stone's steadiness hold part of your weight. It reminds you, in its indifferent firmness, how little your presence alters the environment. The tunnels will outlast you, just as they outlasted the ones before. You feel no resentment in this recognition, only a gentle acceptance, the kind a person develops when they've adapted to the inevitabilities around them. Workers pass by in small clusters, each moving with the same practiced calm. Their faces carry the soft erosion of years, expressions mellowed by repetition, and the quiet solidarity of shared endurance. Some exchange brief glances, the kind that hold entire histories of dust-filled hours and dim-lighted tasks. Others move in silence, conserving breath the way one conserves memory, a careful rationing that preserves only what is essential. Your own thoughts drift with a similar economy. They no longer wander far from the tunnels. Even when memory dips into earlier parts of your life, it does so gently, as if sifting through a chest of faded items. A sound, a smell, a faint warmth from a distant time might surface unexpectedly, but the recollections never linger long. The mind learns to keep itself light. Heavy memories have no place in this narrow world. When you lift your tool, the motion feels familiar enough to be instinctive. The metal vibrates through your arm with the same subtle shiver it always has, and you accept it without reflection. With each strike against the stone, small echoes ripple outward, bouncing against the walls like understated acknowledgements of your existence. These echoes feel more truthful than any spoken word. They mark your passage through the day, documenting each moment of labour in a language the mind understands. You catch the eye of another worker across the narrow tunnel. His face is older now, lined in the way stone wears under persistent weather. He nods lightly, and you return the gesture. These exchanges are not born from companionship in the traditional sense. They are acknowledgements of continuity. You recognize yourself in their fatigue just as they recognize themselves in yours. Mutual endurance becomes its own quiet form of connection. There are moments when the dust settles in a way that feels almost ceremonial. It drifts through the air in soft spirals, catching in the lamplight like faint golden threads. You watch it for a few seconds, noticing how it dances without intention. The dust has seen everything here, every shift, every breath, every worker passing through like a temporary shadow. It gathers in corners and along beams, an archive of lives spent in the dimness. When it coats your skin, you feel less like an individual and more like part of the place itself. Sometimes, during the rare pauses between tasks, the distant sounds of work meld into a soft, vibrating chorus. Picks tapping, ropes sliding through pulleys, a quiet cough, the muted shuffle of footsteps. Together they form a soundscape that is strangely comforting. Not pleasant, just consistent. Predictability becomes its own kind of lullaby. You lean into it, letting it carry some of your thoughts, so you don't have to hold them all yourself. Your sense of self has changed over the years, worn down by the same processes that smooth the edges of awe. It isn't a loss so much as a reshaping. You become someone defined not by external markers, but by the rhythms you uphold. The mind asks only for your effort, not your identity. In a strange way, that simplicity becomes a relief. You drift through the day without the burdens of ambition or expectation. The world narrows to something manageable: dust, breath, motion, rest. You think at times about the silver extracted from these walls. You imagine it emerging in purified form, bright, gleaming, ready to be shaped into coins or vessels, or embellishments worn by people who will never imagine where it came from. That thought used to sting with irony. Now it simply feels like an external fact, neither cruel nor kind. The work continues, the metal moves on, and you remain here, part of a system that relies on your hands, but not your name. The tunnel shifts slightly as a cart rattles past, pulled by two workers whose shoulders bow under the weight. You step aside, offering space, and one of them mutters a quiet thanks, a tired courtesy that does not interrupt the flow of the day. You watch them disappear around a bend, their lantern bobbing like a distant star in the narrow dark. As the day draws toward its slow conclusion, you find a moment to sit on a flat stone ledge. The warmth from your exertion radiates outward, mixing with the cool patience of the ground. You close your eyes, letting your breath settle. The exhaustion is deep, but it is familiar, an old companion. You recognize it the way you recognize the persistent drafts or the soft scrape of sand across the floor. A thought drifts through you, light as falling grit. The mind remembers everyone who passes through it in the same muted way, not as individuals, but as shapes moving in the dark, contributing to an endless ledger of motion and sound. This realization brings no fear, no sadness, just a quiet clarity. You were not brought here to be remembered. You were brought here to work, and when your shape eventually fades from these tunnels, the dust will absorb the absence without ceremony. Still, you are not erased entirely. You leave traces, the impressions of your footsteps, the subtle changes in a support beam where your hand rested, the faint warmth transferred to a tool's handle. These details are small, invisible to most, but real. They form a map of your presence, scattered like fine powder throughout the tunnels. When you rise again, the lamps cast your shadow long and thin across the stone. You walk with the same measured steps you always have, moving deeper into the tunnel's steady rhythm. The echoes follow, soft and spaced, notes in a song the mind has been singing long before you arrived. And in that muted procession of dust and breath, you understand with a calm certainty that your years here are not marked by grand gestures or remembered by names. They exist in the quiet intervals between strikes of the pick, in the slow narrowing of thought, in the subtle erosion that comes from living in a world carved from stone. A life lived in dust and echoes, softly fading, gently persistent, held together by the rhythm of a place that remembers you only in motion and forgets you just as quietly when the motion stops. And that brings us to the end of tonight's story. Feel free to like, subscribe, or leave a comment with another forgotten corner of history you'd like explored next. If you'd like early access to more of these quiet descents into forgotten history, ad-free audio of the episodes, or just want to support the show, there's a link to the Patreon in the description. If you're listening on a podcast app, a rating or review helps more people find their way to these stories. And special thanks to the supporters who make this show possible, including our chroniclers, Andrew S., Rich Davis, and Leslie Schofield. Sleep well.